is we're going to get into the social context of why Demolay even came to be when it came to be. We celebrated the 100th anniversary of Demolay just 2 years ago. And if you were at our symposium, uh, some of this is going to be rehashed or repeated for you. But it's really important to understand the social context as to not just why Demolay started. We're also, right now, we're in the 100th anniversary of Rainbow for Girls. Last year was the 100th anniversary for Job's Daughters. And so this period of time, 100 years later, in our society, it's somewhat shocking because not a whole lot has changed. We've seen a lot of change, but history is cyclical, so we're seeing a lot of repeats. The global pandemic being one of them. 100 years ago, from 1918 to 1920, we had the Spanish flu and influenza pandemic. So things weren't shut down as closely and as tightly as they are now, but population was smaller, was much more spread out. So it would not have been warranted the way it was this time. So
Since we have lost.
just, I'm going to do that. Okay. Anyhow, so by all means, as we're going through this, I hope that you are formulating questions, and if you have anything, thank you. Yes, next year's Rainbow for Girls. We're celebrating, the symposium this year is actually for Job's Daughters and Rainbow, because we missed it on the back end or we missed it last year for Job's Daughters. Anyhow, so moving forward. So the key with Jacques Demolay, who is his namesake is that of the organization for the Order of Demolay for the boys. And that being said, it's important to understand why out of all the people, he was selected in terms of, okay, they're going through all all these works and all these things within the Scottish Rite Library with Frank S. Land, who at the time was the General Secretary of the Missouri Scottish Rite. Why did they pick him? And so we're going to get into him first. So let me see if I can full screen this and it actually works. Yeah, that's my problem. Hold on. I have the same problem in my class. So here we go. Okay. So we'll jump in right into Jacques Demolay. So first things first about Jacques Demolay. He was the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar. Now, the main reason is that the Knights Templar are going to be disbanded shortly after he's arrested. But the main responsibilities and the main rites of passage for the Knights Templar were to be the guardians, protectors of people going to the Holy Land. And that was a responsibility that none of these individuals took lightly, and nobody within this order took lightly. It was something that they coveted, if you will, and the expectations were very high. And the expectations were really centered around proper moral life and really setting a good example of what should be and what should not be. Not just for themselves and those within the order, but for anybody that came into contact with those in the order. And so those expectations were very hard to live up to for some of them. Anyhow, so the charges that were eventually going to be brought against Jacques Demolay and the order were actually originally called for by Demolay himself. He asked the Pope to investigate some members of the order who had become somewhat rogue, had started to understand that there was money to be made in being the protectors of those wanting to go to the Holy Land. And as a result of that, he's going to be called to an audience with the Pope to discuss these charges. However, when he gets to the audience with the Pope, Philip the Fair, the King of France, Philip V, or Philip the Fair, interjected. He basically took on this investigation, these charges that Demolay had brought against members of his own order, and turned the tables and made a lot of these charges against Demolay and some of the higher officials within his order, rather than investigating some of the lower, more junior members of the order. And so in doing that, Philip the Fair took over all the responsibility away from the Pope and away from the Pope's investigation. The Pope's investigation, of course, was going to be very pious. And one of the charges that was being brought against the Knights Templar is that they were just, the men were just a little too friendly with one another. And again, I know there are children on the call. So, and because that was a mortal sin during this period of time, Jacques Demolay flat out denied it, flat out refuted it, and had clear evidence that that was not taking place within the order. But it was enough for Philip the Fair, the King of France, to say, look, these are immoral people. We need to disband this order. We need to take all the money that they've collected from these pilgrims that are going to the Holy Land, because they've taken advantage of them when all they are is a bunch of playboys. So obviously this caters to the immoral situation that's going on, not just with Philip the Fair, the King of France, but with his court, who were notorious for being immoral and notorious for being friendly with each other and with others altogether. And so the final decision of Jacques Demolay to be burned at the stake in the year 1314 was actually made by the king. And the king set it up in a way that the king could sit in one of his many offices that he had throughout France. And one of his offices overlooked an island. And on this island is where they put the stake for Jacques Demolay and 3 of his highest advisors and burn them at the stake, all while King Philip could sit in his office and watch the whole thing take place. So to him, it was a public spectacle as well as entertainment. Just before we get into the next part of this, the Friday the 13th curse that you guys may or may not have heard of, there is a Friday the 13th curse that involves Jacques Demolay. And that's because Jacques Demolay was arrested on Friday the 13th of 1307. And this began the long, arduous process of torturing him, trying to find out where all the money is, trying to find out who all the members were, and led to his legend of not disclosing any of this to anyone. And so that when he was burned at the stake 7 years later, as he was being burned at the stake after the first first plank was set on fire, he said, within the month, Philip the Fair and Pope Clement X will both be dead. Okay? And it happened. They both died within 30 days of Jacques Demolay being burned at the stake on March 18th of 1314. Sorry. So, this is the anniversary of the burning at the stake of Jacques Demolay is March 18th. Anyhow, and so that curse goes all the way back to 1307, the Friday the 13th arresting of Jacques Demolay, and really all the injustices that came upon him. Now, again, we have to put this in a social context. The history of Demolay is legendary. And those of you that are Scottish Rite Masons who have witnessed the 30th degree on more than one occasion can attest to how heralded as a martyr and defender of the truth Jacques Demolay is held up within Scottish Rite. But the social context of why this started when it started is very important. Okay, and it's because there are several things that take place throughout the history of the world. And I teach world history, I teach US history, I teach government. And so I can tell you things that happened back in 6000 BC that still affect us today. For example, the way that we cook our food. goes all the way back to the invention of fire, because people were sick of having cold food. Anyhow, so the events that occur and throughout the history of the world, they have these long held views that change societal norms. So one of the things I talk about in my history class, we talk about the three Abrahamic religions from a historical and societal standpoint. I teach public school, so I don't go into the religiosity of it all. I don't go into any kind of dogma about it. I just go through the historical and societal significance of it all. So if you know Judaism holds hard and fast to a lot of rules. So do Muslims, Islam. They both hold hard and fast to a lot of rules. Where Christianity, our rules are pretty simple, and we don't even have that many. And it's primarily because when Christianity came onto the scene, there was a need for a change in the long-held societal views of subjugating different races, subjugating different classes, and more importantly, subjugating different genders. And so the idea of love and open-mindedness and inclusion really is the historical societal change that Christianity brings. And so because of that, you don't need as many rules, because what you're doing is you're allowing personal responsibility, free choice, and free will to take hold. And it's going to take a long time to take hold. And it's going to take all the way until the Renaissance, where you get free thought and you get humanism. The idea that you can think for yourself, you can make your own choices, good or bad, but the choice is on you. And so that whole idea is part of this societal change. The bubonic plague, similar to what's going on now, bubonic plague, influenza, COVID-19, they all bring about loss. And you can go through the gamut of loss that it brings about. But one of the main things it does is it creates a loss of faith. And because it brings about a loss of faith, because all these people are dying after being told for so long that death would not be a judge or a test. And yet that's exactly what people believed it was. They believed that the bubonic plague, as well as other diseases that ran rampant throughout societies, either for lack of hygiene or because of close proximity, we may never know. But you lose faith. And as soon as you lose faith, you lose morality, and you become a lot more cavalier. And this is the one thing that people start to realize in 1920. It's called the Roaring Twenties. And if you look at the Roaring Twenties, you look at this complete lack of personal responsibility and a complete lack of morality. And it's because people don't see a need to hold themselves and hold their bodies as temples of faith, or as as living stones for a higher being. They don't see the need for that anymore. Well, I'm going to die anyway. I'm going to die of the flu, or I'm going to die of the plague, or I'm going to die of alcoholism, or I'm going to die of drug use, whatever. I'm going to die, so it doesn't matter. And not realizing that death, the death is of course the final judgment, but we don't get to play God. Our fate is already decided. And it's through our trustful faith that allows us to live as long as we do, because we understand that our fate, our immortality, as well as our mortality, are already chosen for us. There's nothing we can do about it. Okay. But then, of course, you have the end of feudalism and social mobility. People get to move. And because people get to move from I'm born poor, but I can die rich, that is going to change the scope and dynamic. Okay. And I always tell my students this great story. Okay. At the end of feudalism, you still had wealthy noblemen. You still had very wealthy individuals and landowners, but they no longer had serfs and servants and peasants that were tied to their land. Serfs and peasants were gone. If people wanted to stay and help out the wealthy landowners and get paid a penance for years of service, then they did that of their own free will and accord. So there's this story of a very wealthy nobleman. Okay, and this wealthy nobleman is told by a psychic, okay, that within the week, the richest man in the valley will die. Well, he starts to freak out. He's the richest man in the valley. He owns the most land. He has the most servants, okay, and he, by all means, has the most gold. And so he starts getting his affairs in order. He starts paying off any debts that he might have. Okay. He starts going around and thanking all the servants for all the years of work that they've given to him and giving them a little extra bonus here and there. What he's doing is he's trying to square his life for the great final judgment. So a week goes by and he's doing all of this work. He's making sure everything's set. And then the week comes and the week goes by and he's still alive. And the next morning he hears a knock on his door. And the knock on the door is from the son of his most trusted servant. And the son says, "Sir, I've come to tell you that sadly my father died last night." To which the wealthiest man, or the richest man as he thought, said, "Well, that's really unfortunate. I'm sorry to hear that." And of course, now he's sitting there thinking, why did he die and I didn't if I'm the richest man in the valley? Well, it turns out he wasn't the richest man in the valley. His most trusted servant had a family. He had children. He had a wife. He had the love of those individuals that cared for him and he cared for them. So the richest man in the valley was the man that had the most trusted faith, not the man with the most money. And that's always the important thing you need to understand about social mobility. Okay, is never lose sight of what rich means. Okay, so I'm not going to go through, so then we go through these time periods. So from 1870 to 1920, huge change in what's going on here in the United States of America, the second industrial revolution, which really sets the factory towns in motion. It sets the whole migration from an agrarian farming community to people wanting to make more money by working in the factory. But of course, they're working these long hours in these really difficult conditions, and in conditions that are going to harm children just as much as they are the adults. And what it's going to lead to is a Panic of 1893. And the Panic of 1893, which is actually going to end up leading into a Great Depression of the 1890s, okay, very often overlooked Great Depression because it was not as great as the Great Depression of the 1930s, but it was a Great Depression nonetheless. And what the Great Depression or the Panic of 1893 is going to do is it's going to set in motion the need to bust up the trust, to bust up those that were controlling all the money. Anybody that's played the game of Monopoly, you all know what the ultimate purpose of that game is. Okay, but in the 1890s with the Sherman Antitrust Acts and the Progressive Era, it was going away from that. Because if we are going to promise people social mobility, we need to at least do something to give them social mobility. And that was not being done. And so then you fast forward to 1918. Okay. And, pardon? Oh, so in 1918, you had we go off to World War I. We send all of our able-bodied men off to World War I. And this is going to, cause women to go work in the factories and give them a job, and also give some children, not all children, but some children jobs, because that's what they needed to do to support the family. But World War I was this ill-advised, ill-timed, and somewhat unnecessary exercise for the United States of America. We were in a really good position economically. We were in a good position from a political standpoint. We had stopped borrowing money. We had started loaning money out more than borrowing because the tides had changed with regards to the money we were bringing in, as well as the trust that Europeans and other countries had with our economy, our economic system. So sending us into World War I was an idea that Wilson had to beef up the economy, even though it was unnecessary, and was also ill-advised because Wilson ran on a re-election campaign of he's the one who kept us out of war, which is true. During Wilson's first term as president, he was adamantly opposed to going to war. He did everything he could to make sure we didn't go to war, and even hiding a lot of the payments that we were sending to the Allied forces, as well as the payments we were sending to the Germans early on. Yeah, we were double dipping quite a bit early on in World War I, because of course we didn't know who was going to win, and because we didn't know who was going to win, we wanted to make certain that we covered all our bases. And so by the time you get into where we into the war, we had stopped giving money to the Germans. But what's going to happen after World War I is not the economic boom that Wilson was expecting, primarily because the economy was doing just fine and everybody was doing just fine. But World War I, sending all these young, able-bodied men off to war, created shell shock. It created the first instances of PTSD. So when all these men come back from war, they're all alcoholics because they're coping with PTSD, the horrors of war that they saw while they were over there, keeping in mind that the horrors of World War I were far worse than the horrors of World War II, primarily because in World War I, they were allowed to use mustard gas and chlorine gas, which was outlawed after World War I. Mustard gas causes debilitating paralysis to where you cannot move your body. And so because you cannot move your body after being hit with mustard gas, you are basically just shooting. You become a shooting target for the enemy. And of course that is incredibly demoralizing for all of your comrades that are watching this take place. But then you have these tensions also of unemployment. You have all these men coming back from war who want their old jobs back. Guess what? The women do your job better. Why? I'm not going to fire your wife. Your wife just does this job much better. She's much more reliable. She's twice as smart as you are. Why on earth would I fire her and hire you back? I don't owe you that job. You're not entitled to that job. And so, okay, you amp up more alcoholism and other cavalier, radical behavior that goes on. There's a lot of family abandonment that takes place in the 1920s due to men losing their feeling of manhood because their wife makes more money and their wife controls everything. So there's a lot of abandonment during the 1920s. So you have a lot of single mothers, and I want you to keep that in the back of your mind as we go into why Demolay started when it did. But then you have this economic disparity where, in today's world, if a wife makes more than a husband, great. There's nothing wrong there. This is somewhat expected. I can tell you that my wife makes more than me, and that's fine. It's never been something of a bother to me. And I know that can make me somewhat of an anomaly in some circles, but it's one of those things where when you're looking at the bigger picture of things, this economic disparity of the 1920s was really due to that loss of basically the reckoning of fragile egos. So yeah. So then you get in the 1920s where there is an economic boom for some, but not for all. And that economic boom is going to show you, if you ever read or watched The Great Gatsby, these lavish parties that they had. But you're also going to have a movement toward temperance. You basically, because you have all these men coming back from war and they've got PTSD, even though it wasn't called that then, it was called shell shock. But because they've got PTSD, because they're drinking heavily, they're coming home and they're taking out their anger and frustration on their wives, as well as their children. So domestic abuse is at an all-time high. So in 1920, after women get the right to vote, one of the first things they push for, and the temperance movement has been going on, since the early 1900s. But it's going to ramp up following World War I. And so this is an idea, and those of you that are apprentices on the call, that temperance is one of our cardinal virtues. And when we think of temperance, we don't think of controlling our alcohol consumption. We think about controlling our moral outreach. We are concerned with how do we make ourselves better in order to make others better. And so, but temperance during this time was strictly, had everything to do with how do we stop alcoholism? Okay, how do we figure out a way to, quote unquote, cure these men of this dangerous disease of alcoholism? And so prohibition is passed. Now, you should note a couple of things. During the period of prohibition, alcohol sales reached an all-time high, even though they were illegal, because you had speakeasies and you had, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but the invention of NASCAR. The invention of NASCAR is actually from rum runners. Rum runners were people that distilled rum in their backyards or their front yards because they didn't care. And they had these cars that with souped up engines and with souped up carrier systems so that they could put their barrels of rum in the back, tie it down, and because they had these souped up engines, they could outrun the police officers that are trying to catch them to break up their stills. Okay. And so from that comes stock car and NASCAR, because you had these guys that knew how to build really, really fast cars. And so that is going to be a huge major component of the underbelly of prohibition. Okay. And women's suffrage, keeping in mind that there were already several states that allowed women to vote, but they did not allow women to vote for federal elections. Now, if you go back in time, Thomas Jefferson was elected President of the United States with the women vote. Okay, so in 1801, when Thomas Jefferson was elected President of the United States, women were allowed to vote in all the colonies. You had national federal women's suffrage in the 1800s. It was not something that they took away. They did not take it away until Thomas Jefferson was elected president in 1801. And he got the women vote. And he got the women vote because it doesn't take much, but he's much more attractive than John Adams. And so all these men said, okay, the only reason Thomas Jefferson won is because he's more attractive than John Adams. And the women voted for him for that reason. Not because he was 15 times smarter than John Adams. It was because he was more attractive. So they take away the right to vote from women after the 1801 election. And by 1809, women are not allowed to vote anywhere. Anyhow, so then you have the Great Depression, which is obviously going to create a major economic, societal implosion, if you will. And then it's going to lead us right into World War II. And World War II is going to get us out of the Great Depression, unlike World War I, which was not necessary. World War II, from an economic standpoint, if you only look at the economics of it all, was necessary, because we were never going to get out of the Great Depression unless there was a major, major global thing that got a bunch of people involved to dig us out of this hole. Keeping in mind that by the time World War II started, Great Britain, Germany, France, Mexico, most of South America, most of Asia were all gone from the economic depression tide pool that was still going on here in the United States of America. So very, very important to note. Okay, so it brings about the necessity of Demolay. Okay, so you have all this immoral behavior going on during the 1920s. You've got rampant alcoholism, you've got family separation, you've got our family abandonment situations going on. You have a lot of boys that their dads didn't make it back from the war, or their dads, like Louis Lauer, who was the first Demolay, his dad died in a horrific factory accident. And following his father's death, Louis Lawler had to go work. He had to support his family. And Louis Lauer is purely by happenstance is going to be taken to meet up with Frank S. Land. Frank S. Land was a devout Methodist. He was an elder of his church. That they were going to have this coming together moment where they're going to collaborate on how to help these young men. And so this fostering of personal growth and this ensuring of personal responsibility becomes the norm of really this values-based life. And those of you that are Masons on the call, entered apprentices or beyond, those that are Scottish Rite Masons, you'll know that the main component of all these things, of all of our teachings, is really not to change your values, not to change your approach to the world, but to solidify your personal belief system and really ensure that your personal belief system works with somebody else's. And that's really the fundamental component here. So then you get into the Demolay ritual, and I'm just going to go through this. But the founding of Demolay, of course, this started with 9 young men meeting at the Kansas City, Missouri Scottish Rite Temple, meeting with Frank S. Land, who was the secretary, going through the rituals, going through the books, and really learning about the history and legend of Jacques Demolay. And by learning the legend and history of Jacques Demolay, they found somebody that they could not only immortalize, someone that they could emulate. And those of you that have gone through the rituals of different Masonic groups, Blue Lodge and others, you'll know that part of our ritual is to emulate those men that have gone before us and to emulate those men who founded our organizations as a way to not lose sight of the vision that they had all those years ago in a different historical context and in a different societal context than what we have now. And the development of the 1919 ritual, which is not too far from the Demolay ritual of today, okay, that development of the ritual was really centered and housed within the necessity of these other organizations that had already come before them, Eastern Star being a main one, Scottish Rite, obviously, York Rite. And so as a fostering of all that ritual that had already come before, and when they were really developing the ritual of Demolay, they didn't want to go too far outside the norms that had been there before. So, they're following the craft lodge models of the late 17th and early 18th centuries without the hazing. You should note that hazing was a common norm in most craft lodge rituals, from the continent, Europe, as well as the early lodges here in the United States of America, who formed their lodges based on ritual from Europe. So you can't fault them for having hazing because that's what they knew. Anyhow, so you have Eastern Star, Frank Marshall, who was the author of the Demolay ritual. He was a past patron. His wife was very active in Eastern Star. He was very familiar with Eastern Star ritual. And Eastern Star ritual was started in 1850. It was formalized in the 1870s. Rob Morris founded it. John McCoy, Robert McCoy is going to finalize it to where it is now. But then the one thing that we're going to put in there, that Demolays are going to put in there, is the 9 o'clock interpolation. And the 9 o'clock interpolation was really a necessity so that we did not lose sight of the whole reason we came. If you've never been to a Demolay meeting or a Demolay event where the 9 o'clock interpolation is used, the way the 9 o'clock interpolation ends, you say amen, and then you say, God bless mother, God bless father, God bless the purposes of Demolay. That's public, so I didn't give anything away if there's some prospective Demolay members on the call. But that 9 o'clock interpolation solidifies the main purpose of why we started this, to give the young men a father figure, to give the young men a family connection that they were missing by being alone. Not that moms weren't great moms, but nevertheless, it was a necessity. Okay, so then you get the initiatory degree, and you go through the 3 principal tenets of Masonry and its cardinal virtues, and this is going to be, it's going to explain the Demolay preceptors in a young man's context. And so, the talk that I'm giving next Thursday, no shameless plug here for myself, but is comparing the 3 principal tenets and 7 and 4 cardinal virtues of craft masonry with the 7 precepts, and how they correlate to one another, and how those connections were, it wasn't an accident. This was necessary, not because we're trying to make them junior Masons, but it's because if we as grown men think that these principal tenets and 4 cardinal virtues are necessary for us to lead good lives as men, then we need to give those to the young men in a different context, to where they can relate to it, while still being a kid. And then of course the Demolay degree, this is a prequel to the Scottish Rite 30th degree. Again, I don't want to give anything away, but if you are a Scottish Rite Mason and you've seen the Demolay degree, then hopefully you made the connection. When I joined Scottish Rite all those years ago, I had not been a senior Demolay for very long. I was always Master Inquisitor in the Demolay degree, so I had the best seat in the house. And so I saw this as a continuation of what I had done in Demolay, taking it a step further and going beyond what I learned in Demolay. And of course, the Masonic trilogy for young men, again, presented in a young man's context of birth, renewal, and death, and rising, resurrection. Those are so necessary for a young man to understand the perspective of life. That it might be really hard right now, but if you really work hard, if you really put in the effort, it will get better. And that's the Demolay degree, is that if even though it ends in a tragedy, it doesn't end the legacy. And that is the whole component of Masonry, is that even when something ends in a tragedy, it does not end the legacy of what it means to be a Mason. So there you go. All done. So questions, comments? I think the criticizers are already off the call, so.
Worshipful, my apologies for that incident. So,
Sean, you didn't do it. You didn't plan it. I see Alberto's on the call, so we can blame him. It's easier for everybody.
Yeah.
It's easier for everybody if we just do that. So if there was somebody else on the call that I knew as well as I know Alberto, I'd blame them for it. Why isn't Paul here? Paul Bazarkani over here. Great guy to play. Anyhow, so these things happen. You can't control everything. So, and all we can do is rise above it. So,
yeah.
But
good thing Worshipful Hyros here backing me up. One of the tilers, so we're tiled.
Well,
we were in our Zoom meeting in Burbank, and with Paul, we're like, we should go see Brian. Brian's talking in San Fernando. We came in right on that. We're like, whoa!
Oh, wow! Good job. Well,
Yeah.
we know it was.
Worshipful, I have a question.
Sure.
Jeff Davis, San Fernando. I was wondering if you had any kind of figures of when the young men go from to become Masons? What kind of, so if the young men go from becoming a Mason, if they stay, or it's been my experience in the past that the Demolay, and I've met some that were in Demolay for years and years and years, they just don't want to come back to Masonry.
Well, I don't have any exact figures, but I can tell you from my own personal experience, the percentage of senior Demolays that become Masons is very low. And there's really no rhyme or reason why. Even guys that I spent time with in Demolay, we had a great time. We had great Demolay advisors, men that we all looked up to. I'm one of the few that not only became a Mason, but became an active Mason. Just to kind of put it in perspective, we don't have a lot of senior Demolays that are very active now in the Grand Lodge of California. So it's really kind of an unfortunate thing. And again, I don't have the numbers. I'm sure somebody somewhere has extrapolated that data, maybe for their own personal edification, but that has not been shared with anybody. And I think it's a number that we wouldn't want to share publicly, because then it would justify or give a reason to not join Masonry. So, yeah. And the thing is too, with Demolay, as I mentioned, it was never designed to make them junior Masons. That was never the intent. In fact, of the 9 original Demolay, I think only 3 of them went on to become Master Masons. So it was something that helped them get through the very tumultuous years of being a teenager, but they didn't see it because they did not meet Masons, more Masons like Frank Land. So it's unfortunate.
Is it because we as Masons do not interact with the Demolays that we kind of set them apart and we're not active? We would be more active. The transition would be easier.
There's some of that. I mean, I can tell you that when I was in Demolay, we Demolay, if there was ever something broken at the lodge, they blamed the Demolay. Even if the Job's Daughters and the Rainbow were there, or you just had a clumsy Mason, it didn't matter. They blamed the Demolay. There are several senior Demolays that will tell you the reason they did not join Masonry is that they felt like they got crapped on by the Masons. So you can say, yeah, it's a lack of interaction, but I think a lot more has to do with a lack of really setting a better example. And what I mean by that is that if you see a young man, you should go out of your way. If I see a young man walk into lodge and he's 21 years old, I go up and I shake his hand and I start talking to him. I'll do the same thing if a 14-year-old kid walks in the door, because it's our job to set a tone. And if we don't set a tone of welcoming and a tone of friendliness, why would they come back regardless of your age? So, yeah. So I think Andrew's talking because I could see his lips moving, but he's muted.
It's Andy Winter, sorry. I know a senior Demolay. He's very active in Demolay, and you ask him why he didn't become a Mason, and he says, well, that would have just ruined it. And I don't know what that's about, but I think possibly some of the advisors that are Masons have left a bad taste in some of our Demolays and senior Demolays.
That's possible. I mean, who knows? I can tell you that I was very blessed. I had great Demolay advisors, some of whom I still see from time to time when we're not stuck on Zoom. And we have great relationships. But one thing that they did for me when I was a teenager, which I don't think that we do a good job of, they treated me like a young man. They did not treat me like a kid. That was their, they spoke to me like I was an adult. They spoke to me because they wanted me to understand maturity. And to this day, I have, you know, most of my friends are older. Most of the gentlemen I interact with are older. And you know, not that I don't have friends that are in my same age peer group, but when I was a kid, I never had a hard time talking to an adult, ever. If you ask my father-in-law, I was a consummate kiss ass. I still am. I mean, because I know how to talk to an adult. So, but yeah, I think that there is a little bit of that. We need to do a better job. We need to do a little bit better job of setting tones, and we need to do it as Masons, and we need to do it with each other as well as with young men and young women. You know, there's really not a Bethel or assembly anywhere near me for me to have those opportunities. But Demolay, I mean, one of my lodges has a Demolay chapter, so I interact with them quite a bit. So,
Worshipful, the older member that you talk to, that wouldn't be Worshipful Alberto, would it?
well, I like to consider Alberto one of my friends, but you know, he is much older than I am. I'm just kidding.
I kind of thought that.
Well, Alberto and I have a very understanding relationship, being that the first couple of times that I was doing introductions, I totally forgot Alberto was in the room. Yeah, so you know, so he makes it a point every time we're at something together, even if I'm not doing the introductions, to come up and introduce himself as though we've never met before. You know, he's never going to let me live it down, which is
No, I won't.
yeah, that's fine. So yeah.
Anyone who forgets you is not your friend, that's for sure.
Oh. Okay.
So what he just said about he's my best friend or good friend, that's just for you guys. It's not coming from here
Oh,
because he forgets me every time.
I do not forget you. I have not forgotten you since those first 2 times. Ever since I've been 2 times, fine. Fine. So yeah. Just remember, there's always going to be a day, and I try to remember this every chance I get. There's always going to be that day when someone you've wronged has the microphone, and you don't know what they're going to do.
Yeah.
One day, Alberto's going to have the microphone.
Yes,
and
one
he's
day.
gonna say stuff, and it's not going to be pretty. Let's hope that Joan's around to make sure he's, you know, somewhat temperate. So yeah. So, anyhow. Yeah.
Worshipful, I would like to acknowledge the presence of the visitors from Canada. Worshipful Jeff Perry, he's the incoming Grandmaster for Scottish Rite. Am I correct, Worshipful Jeff?
I'm the Deputy Grand Master for Knights Templar Canada.
Nice Templar.
And next year I get installed as the Supreme Grand Master for Knights Templar Canada. But I'm a Rite Worshipful in the lodge as well, past District Deputy Grand Master. And I must say, Brian, it was a very informative, very enjoyable presentation you did tonight. I was paying absolute attention to it. And you're one of the best presentations I've seen. It was nice, clean, precise, and informative, and enjoyable. So congratulations on a very grand presentation.
Well, thank you, and congratulations on your ascension. I know that you'll do a fine job, and so I appreciate your kind comments. I really do. And if you could, I would like for you to maybe send some etiquette rules to Alberto. Yeah, you know, just go ahead and just type those up.
Well, Alberta, don't feel bad. In the last 2 Zoom meetings of Sovereign Great Priory preceptories, I've been ignored too. So
join the ranks.
so it goes around.
Well, just so you know, my grandfather Stu, who I take most after, is from Guelph, Ontario, Canada. He immigrated here to the United States in 1941 and went for his citizenship papers to start the process on December 9th of 1941. For those of you that are history buffs, you might know what happened next. He was an enlisted man in the United States Army the next day and was sent off to the CBI, but that's how he got his citizenship. He served in the military. So, yeah. So I have a fondness for Canadians, and I believe that all Canadians are kind and nice, and so kudos to you guys. So, and then you also mentioned, thank you. You also mentioned, Worshipful You, that we have some brethren from the Philippines.
Yes,
Okay.
we do. We have the current master of Cebu Lodge, number 128, which is my classmate, my elementary classmate, worshipful brother John Luis Yu. He's there.
Okay.
Good
Now,
evening, everyone.
He's a Demolay too, I believe.
No, I'm not a Demolay.
Oh, not Demolay. Okay.
I'm not Demolay.
Welcome.
I'm at work, so I'm wearing my mask and face shield because it's standard here. So you guys have to pardon for not seeing my face, but I'll show my face for a while.
Thank you for joining us.
and you now have the microphone.
Thank you for the invitation.
Now you have the
Thank you
microphone.
for the
So you can tell us stories about Sean.
I have a lot of editing to do.
Yeah.
No, later when he becomes past master, I don't want you guys to lose respect for your current worshipful master. No, we're good friends all the way.
I'm sure you are. I'm sure you are. So.
There's also former senior warden from the Philippines is Ron Reynes, but he's residing here. He was a Demolay. He's living here in Downey. Yeah. Good evening, brother.
Good evening, brother. Good evening, brother Brian.
So he's from the Philippines too.
Oh, look at that. He's got a little one.
As Master Counselor.
And
that's my son. And my little Demolay. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, brother Ronald.
Very nice, being a Demolay here.
Thank you for joining us. And then we have from Malaysia, brother Loy.
Yeah, we also have we also invited some senior Demolays from Philippines. They're listening. Okay.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, brother Ronald. Who else? Lieutenant Sergeant Charles, brother Charles. Good evening to you, sir.
Good morning. Good morning. Good evening.
Good morning there in the Philippines.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to hear again.
Thank you for joining us, brother Charles.
Welcome, brothers.
And we have from Malaysia, brother Loy. Can you hear us, brother Loy? I think he's at work.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, it was really an enjoyable time. I appreciate you inviting me, and it's obviously a topic I love. I love speaking about, and I have a very strong affinity for. So we can just forget the bad incident that happened and just remember the good, and continue to be good Masons and continue to be good role models. So.
Worshipful, thank you again for that great presentation. I have a lot of, as I've said, I have a lot of editing to do. I need to cut that off.
Well, you're doing a great job. So just keep up the good work, and I hope to see you guys again very soon.
Hope to see you in person soon,
Yes.
Worshipful.
Thank you so
And
much.
where's Paul Bazarkanian? I don't see him no more.
Oh, was he on? Oh, I could have blamed the guy. Oh, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, he was there. Yeah,
But it does remind me, I have to call Paul tomorrow about something completely unrelated. So anyhow.
Yes,
All right.
yes.
3 inspectors in one night, we can't do that.
Huh?
3 inspectors in one night, you can't have that. You have Jonathan already who's sitting here, myself.
Oh, Worshipful Jonathan, yeah. Good evening, Worshipful.
We can't have 3. Yourself?
No more than 3? Okay.
No more than 3 inspectors.
But if we can get to Alberto, then we still only have 2. We're getting
Actually 4. Actually 4. It's 4.
Who's the 4th?
4.
Who's the 4th?
Yourself. You, Brian, me, and Paul.
Bazarkanian.
Yeah. So we broke the limit. Good job. So well, and for those of you on the call that don't know, Right Worshipful Perry mentioned that he's a former district deputy grand master, which is their equivalent of an inspector. And even within the United States of America, there are jurisdictions who use that title of deputy district grand master. That's their equivalent of an inspector. So anyhow, all
There's
right.
5.
Okay.
There's 5 inspectors,
I know.
4 locals and 1 import.
Wow, it's like going to a liberal arts meeting.
Yeah.
They have 6 there. Oh,
6, yeah.
Anyway. All right, gentlemen. Well, be well. Take care. Stay safe. And I hope to see all of you soon, either on Zoom or in person. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Worshipful Brian.
Thank you very much,
Thank you,
Worshipful.
Worshipful Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will send you the link after.
Thank you,
I edit.
Worshipful Master.